Hey, what's up, C-Maniac Nation? C-Man finally has a laptop, and that means it's time to bring you some really, really old content. I had a lot of stuff back in January that I was working on when my laptop got broken because I'm not smart. My new laptop then got lost in transit for a while. It finally has arrived. I am back, and like I said, I've got some things that I want you guys to check out. That we're back in January, so don't mind the brighter blonde hair, and don't mind the fact that I'm coming off COVID and talking about things that are from way in the past. So without further ado, take it away, Paris Seaman!
Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. We're talking movies again this week. After my little COVID sabbatical, I had to dive in and talk about some movies that we only did immediate reactions to. We've talked about Poor Things. We've talked about Saltburn. We just talked about the confounding debacle that is Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. If you want to see my thoughts on the movie and my rant on the poor decision making that Netflix is doing, you can see that right up there. But now I want to turn my attention to a movie that I just saw. And, you know, it was one of the upsides to having COVID, as I was in my bed just watching TV and movies a lot. And this was one that I was excited when it was getting ready to come out on Netflix. Ironically, we're going to stay in the Netflix realm, and something that is a movie that could be in my top 10. It's not. But, like, it has the caliber of things that could get it there. Specifically, it's cast. You're talking Julia Roberts, Mahershala Ali, Ethan Hawke. But then you're talking about a concept that scared me probably more than any movie I have watched this year. Every second of this movie is terrifying. And made me realize that, like, if everything just suddenly went the way it went in this movie, I'm not surviving that world. What am I talking about? Why don't you pull up a chair? Take a seat. We are getting ready to dive in, spoiler free, into Leave the World Behind. Oh my goodness. What a fantastic movie this ended up being. It was one of those things where it's like, talking to some people, I was hearing like some mixed vibes. You know, some people at work were kind of down on it. There were other people at work that were up on it. A couple of my buddies who had seen it thought it was good, but like interesting. And my buddy BP put it probably the way that I think worked the best when he was like, dude, I don't know if it's the state of mind I am in, which I could also confer and understand for myself when I was watching it. I kind of felt the same way. Like, is it the state of mind I was in, or is it the movie? But this thing is scary in such a real world way, and it feels so tangible that it makes it that much more terrifying. And when I watched it, I went, yeah, that's what it is. And like, it's one of these things where, like, this isn't a horror movie that, like, presents jump scares or your traditional scares. But it's like the stuff that's happening in the movie feels so real world and feels so tangible that it's legitimately terrifying. Like, if people who don't like America teamed up and were able to take out not just our communications, not just our internet, but, like, satellites. Like, you are nothing. Like, imagine that, like, you just live in the woods and that's all you got. If someone could turn America into that and could actually do that, that is the horrifying things that are going on here, because that's what happens. And it's one of these where this movie is presented in a way where it's like, this is what we're giving you. But when you start to talk about this movie, there's so many elements and things at play that are wonderful. And, you know, it's this cyber attack that happens to America, and we are seeing it from the perspective of two families. There's a family that rented an Airbnb for a little vacation time. The family who owns that Airbnb opts to come back because of a blackout, trying to get back into the city, you know, or staying in the city just didn't feel right, so they come back out to where the home is. there's a little bit of friction there, but eventually everybody's able to kind of coalesce together, and you're kind of riding this thing out where it's like we think a cyber attack has happened based on, there's this blackout, the TVs aren't working, you get the national emergency signal goes out, it's either that or it's static, your phones aren't working, all this stuff where it's like, okay, this feels like a cyber attack, enough to the point where we can go with it. And then you watch these families have to navigate, they're out in Long Island, I can't tell if it's, like, I want to say it's the off season, because there's, like, nobody out there. Like, it's a very, very small group of people. Like, the day that they go to the beach, there's only, like, a handful of people out there. So I'm thinking, like, it's still warm enough to be swimming, but also, like, cool enough for it. So I'm thinking it's, like, probably the end of the summer out in Long Island somewhere where you're kind of in a more remote location. Not, like, the heart of the city or anything like that. And what do you do when you have no power and no form of communication? And what do you do? And then, besides what do you do, when you start thinking about what could be happening and you can't get information from anywhere, what does that do? That's the thing that I think makes Leave the World Behind such a fantastic movie, is the writing from our director, Sam Ishmael, and Ruman Alam is his co-writer here. Ishmael, all the directing on his own. But it's a conceptual story that just can spark so much conversation, right? Like, what would you do in this type of situation? What could it mean? What would happen if there was a coordinated attack like this? What if it's not about a coordinated attack? Like, that's the thing. Like, you get to the end of the movie and you feel like like, I felt like I had a pretty firm grip on what was going on. Like, yeah, man, there were some people, like some anti-American folks that live out there. We know we got enemies. They teamed up. They made some decisions. They made this happen. And everything that's going to happen from this point forward is all in a takedown of, like, let's just take America out. I'm at therapy, and, we've talked about this with Poor Things. But, again, when I go to therapy, a lot of times, if I'm not having a bad day, me and my therapist, we just talk about movies. And we were talking about Leave the World Behind. Like, I had told her to watch Poor Things. She did. And then she had told me to watch Leave the World Behind, and I did. And she was like, but what if it's just about chaos, Corey? Like, what if the idea wasn't to, like, do something that, like, has multiple steps and a plan and all these things are happening, like, in a domino effect? What if it was just create chaos? And I went, that's so much more terrifying. Like, if there was no direct point or end game, just like, we don't like America, we want to create chaos. And it could be even, like, not like we hate America. It could be, like, anywhere in the world. You just hate people. Which, like, I hate people, so, like, I get that. I wouldn't do none of this. But, like it could substitute America for somebody else. Like, what if these people just want to create chaos? Because what they do does create chaos, but also, like, can create long-lasting chaos. If you want to take a country out, make them fight from within. And I don't know if y'all watch the news or if you've been living in this country for the last few years, but there's a lot of conflict in America. And if you took away cell phones and, the ability to make phone calls or look things up on the internet or GPS, or, like, you take all these things away and turn people into their base instincts, do people come together? Or do people stay separate? Do they fight each other? Oh man, like, everything's out, oh no. Like, we've seen all these types of movies. We've seen these post-apocalyptic things and how they all turn out, how they play out. We see how these people get together. You gotta form factions, and then there's infighting, and there's things, like, is one of these scenarios where, like, the stuff that happens in this movie could just create an internal civil war. You just take it out yourself. All of that is terrifying and creates really interesting conversation. Like, we had a good talk, me and Monica, yesterday, and we went to a lot of places, and I commend a movie that from its script can generate that much conversation. But then when you talk about what Ishmael's doing behind the camera, that's when this thing Like it's what makes this movie special, and like the more it sits with you, the more intrigued, the more interesting, the better it is. Choosing a remote location for this stuff to start happening, genius, right? It really puts you in this world of isolation, where it's like, look, I live in a city. I'm in Stamford. It's really easy to get to New York City. It's not terribly far to get to DC. Like I had said to Monica yesterday, I'm like, all right, at the worst, there's no way to get any kind of information. I'm in a place where, like, you can at least get to a place where information could be coming from someplace. Or, you know, at least in a spot where you're interacting with more people. You go out to a desolate area where you're left alone and there's not so many people. That's when things start getting eerie. And that's the thing that I really like that Ishmael does here, is this movie, I said this while I was watching, I was like, this has got like M. Night vibes to it. And it's not just Ishmael himself. I think it's a combo of both him and his composer here, Mac Quayle, who creates a score that, with some of the imagery and some of the things that are going on story-wise, that like there was just a lot of moments in the movie where I was like, you can kind of tell that this guy probably was influenced by M. Night a little bit. Some of the camera work, just the vibes, like I said, coming out of the score, the way people talk to each other, the just eerie tone that looms over everything that's happening in the movie. Like, it just had a very M. Night vibe to it, which I thought was genius. To give it this kind of like horror movie vibe, while not being a direct horror movie, but dealing with something that is legitimately terrifying, just worked so well. And the way that Ishmael is able to build out some of these sequences, whether it's a boat coming toward shore, or Ethan Hawke on a drive without GPS, or there's a thing that happens with Teslas in this movie. I was squirming, afraid. Like the anxiety that the Tesla sequence gave me, especially being alone, like confined, like in a quarantine type deal. Like my heart rate was elevated. You know what I mean? Deer, there are deer in this movie. Ishmael plays with deer. Like all of these things that he plays with just create this uneasy, unsettling vibe. And then as the story continues to go and go and go, and we start to learn more, because that's the other thing that Ishmael does really well here, hides a lot of stuff, keeps a lot of stuff from us. And I loved that, because it pulls you into the movie where it's like, I want to figure this stuff out too. Like the families are kind of have an idea of what's going on. They're trying to figure it out. I want to figure it out. Yet you're just given all of these really eerie moments. And then to cut that though, there are some really wonderful human moments. There's some stuff going on with Julia Roberts' character that, you know, seems pretty obvious to what it is. So, you know, there are elements in here. Obviously, like, you have a white family vacationing in Long Island, and you have Mahershala Ali's family is the family that owns the house, the black family. Ishmael definitely has some conversations around race without having conversations around race. It was like the subtle racism vibes that pop in and out at certain times, I thought were interesting and really play into what ultimately comes by the end, like the idea of infighting. What are the things that start to break people down when you're put into this confined type place? Like someone who's got some subtle racism, does it become more? Does it become stronger? Julia Roberts is the character, spoilers, that kind of has these vibes. She's very untrusting early on. And she has a wonderful sequence where, you know, her and Mahershala Ali have a very real conversation, and then it leads to something that's actually enjoyable. There are some enjoyable moments in this movie where things aren't the world falling apart, specifically early on as we're kind of navigating some of this. But the conversations they have, and then how that spirals and spins back the other way, like the way they're able to play with those things, and the, again, base instincts of certain people and certain types of people, and how that would play into a oh shit type moment, I just thought was really interesting. And I love that Ishmael gives us this mix and blend of things that make you uncomfortable and make you unsettled, but also allow you to sink into, like, it's not terrible. It's not all bad. Look, we can still have some enjoyment. We can all have a nice night, to then dial it back up to, like, things getting crazy. And there are some crazy elements toward the end of this movie around the sun and around this sound that we're hearing. And again, hardcore M. Night vibes around those things. And again, unsettling. Like, there's something happens in this movie where I had to cover my eyes. It's one of my own personal worst nightmares. It's something that recurs in those nightmares. And the idea of, like, you know what I mean? And I thought it was just so impressive for a movie to evoke that many things. Like, the amount of things, whether it was positive or negative feelings that I felt during the course of this movie, were just wild. And, like, the other thing to kind of go in tandem with Quayle's music and composition, the sound design on this movie, you want to talk about feeling unsettled and uncomfortable, but the amount of times there are just sounds going on in this movie that, if on for prolonged periods of time or hitting just the right peaks and valleys, like, the sound design in this movie also creates that tension and that uneasiness and feeling like how all of that plays into everything. I just thought was such a wonderful magic trick to watch. And then, like, also, again, something that feels so tangible and so real world that, like, it makes you think about stuff. And then the performances here are all just excellent. Like I said, Julia Roberts, I think her character, Amanda, is one of the more fascinating ones, and specifically how she interacts with Mahershala Ali's G.H. Scott. It's very interesting. Like I said, there's these subtle notes of racism that come from that character, but, like, also how she's able to skirt it, you know what I mean? And I think the scary racists in the world are ones that can. And it's, like I said, it kind of plays into this idea of, like, what is a person at their base? And when put with their back completely against the wall, how would they act? How would they interact? And I think some of the things that Julia Roberts does play into this vibe of her kind of being a subtle racist, and maybe, like, one that would be a scary racist. But at the same time, there are people, like, I said that to, I think, my mom or my dad, and they were like, wow, I wasn't even picking up. I'm like, really? So it's like you have these characters that can kind of go both ways, and I think Roberts walks that line perfectly, where it's like, there are times where you're like, man, she's dead, but then you're like, well, maybe she's not. Maybe it's just, like, the general uneasy feeling. Like, Ishmael delivers these things where there's layers to everything that's going on, and how your actors deliver it, I just think give you really wonderful performances. And I hated Roberts' character for a lot of this movie, just different ways that she acts or how she handles things. Specifically early on, I was like, oh, that's the kind of person I don't like. And she's very, very good in that role. And what's great, though, is, like, by the end of the movie, you kind of ride, like, there are things that she does too that you ride with, and I think that she's really good in all those fronts. Mahershala Ali obviously plays opposite her, as the guy who owns this house and is dealing with this subtle, racism at times, and how he handles it and how he walks things, because he maybe isn't being 100% truthful, is also something that I think is just a narrow walkway to balance on, but Ali handles it perfectly. And then how that can trickle down to the relationship with his daughter in the movie and what their conversations are. Like, it's one of these where, like, he's well aware of everything that's going on at all times. And how he plays with those stuff and how he bounces off of different folks in the movie is great. And like I said, he has that one sequence with, Roberts that's just, like, real world, but gets to a place where, like, by the end of that whole sequence, like, she's like, I really can hate you, GH. Like, the way they play off each other is wonderful. I also love watching Ali play off of Ethan Hawke, who is one of my all-time faves, and here he's great, man. He's like, he's the character I could vibe with, man, where it's like, why are we all freaking out, man? Like, there's a situation, there's weird things going on. Can't we all just get like, he's the positive, like, the like, almost like the North Star, right? Like, that person and the way their brain functions, I can kind of ride with. And he has some wonderfully pleasant interactions with Mahershala Ali on screen. But just like his demeanor and things, and then to see that character shook really amplifies, I think, some of the fear in the movie. And it's one of these where it's like, I could personally vibe with a lot of what was going on with Ethan Hawke's Clay, to the point that where you see him shook me, because I was like, nah, man, like, yeah, I'm screwed in this world. You know what I mean? But Ethan Hawke is great. Yeah, their two children, Ethan Hawke and Julia Roberts, played by Farrah McKenzie and Charlie Evans. Farrah McKenzie, her Rose, is a fascinating character for lots of reasons. And the same goes for Charlie, who plays Archie. Like, Archie and Rose represent a younger demographic in this world, you know, and the things that matter to them comparatively to the things that are mattering to the audience, to the things that are mattering to the adults. It's a very interesting look at this time, specifically Rose. Rose is a character where it's like she's almost kind of single-minded to a degree, and how that can like be louder than the big world picture things that are going on. Again, I think kind of speaks to a lot of societal things when it comes to you. Like, her character, I feel like that's how my sister would be. Like, world's coming to an end, possibly, things are shit in the bed, focused on this problem. Like, I thought that was really good. I thought that Farrah McKenzie was excellent there. Archie, less so. You know, he's more of an older teenager. He does kind of have this, like, you know, trying to, like, the teenager who's trying to avoid, like, enjoy, like, vacation, you know, like, everybody should just chill a little bit, like, whatever. And then he gets some real life horror things going on with him where I was just like, oh man. But I really enjoyed him. And then last but not least, Myla, who plays Ruth Scott, GH's daughter. You know, again, another interesting younger perspective mixed in with these, you know, more adult perspectives around what's going on. And it's like, when you look at the three kids, it's kind of like the almost like the stages of development, right? Like, you got someone who's a lot younger, can be a lot more single-minded with what's going on. You have someone who's in the middle who is more kind of looking at things in a, come on, like, it's not, you're making stuff up, you're full of BS, like, you're kind of also in your own world, but single focused around something a little bit different. And then you get Ruth's character, who I think is like on the end of the spectrum for you know, your younger characters, where like she's a little bit more skeptical and understands kind of the real world fears that are going on a little bit more, but at the same time like has this attitude that exists where it's like, you know, how dare somebody do this or this. The way she interacts around Julia Roberts and vice versa, again, really interesting dynamics coming from the two of them as well. And when you get all of these different things, like you have like people that could vaguely be connected to what's going on, so you might have more information than other people. You have, you know, these two adults who are kind of well off, but like thrown into this perpetual nightmare, and one who's kind of overbearing and way more like, no, not what is and you know, someone else who's trying to figure things out. Like, just all of the different characters. It's been so long since I've seen a movie with a group of characters as diverse as this from a storytelling perspective, and like what their individual perspectives are meaning to the thing that's actually going on in the movie. And all of that together, I just thought created a magic trick that like this movie has gotten better and better and better the more and more I think or talk about it. I was really, really, really impressed with Leave the World Behind. So let's get the C-Maniacs up. Like I said, Sam Esmail and his co-writer, Ruman Alam, just develop a script that is really the highlight of this whole movie. Like, the way it functions just on the page, to what it brings in conversation out of the page, to how all of the characters have all these different layers and how those layers can play into the overall story. Like, it's just one of these movies where like my brain is, you know, I've been watching Tacoma FD because that just dropped on Netflix, and I'm a big fan of the Broken Lizard guys, even though it's just Lemmy and Heffernan. But there's one of these things where Steve Lemmy's character he's the captain of the fire department. He goes into like these thinking things, and he throw all like the different math equations. Like, this movie's making my brain do that, where it's like I'm thinking and going, bouncing off all these, except like instead of mathematics, it's like you're going into like conspiracy theory zones, and and my brain is just doing all these. And to create a script that can do that for a viewer, I guess for some people could be a negative, but for someone like me who enjoys that type of material, like, whew, this movie just gets better and better and better. And the idea of taking on a cyber attack that could take out power and satellites and internet, and what does that do, especially when you're in a localized location where you're not around lots of people? How does that make people flip? Like, it's one of those where it's like and some of there are shots in the movie where you can see the city and you can see things that are going on in the city, and it's like, what that chaos looks like. That chaos is kind of that claustrophobic terror. Put you out on the island, isolated. That fear is something totally different. And then just to play into all the things that if you did that, what else could it play into, or what other things could happen that create some wild things? I mean, one of the sequences with Mahershala Ali that ends up with him getting very wet, you're just sitting, you're like, oh no. Same thing with the beach sequence. The same thing with the Tesla sequence, man. Like, to create that kind of, like, I really feel the fear. This was the scariest movie I've seen all year. And then, like I said, when you have the Quail score and the sound design, like, Ishmael just knows how to play with the things that will unsettle you the most, from a psychological standpoint, from a physical standpoint, to like, just all of it ticks perfectly. And then you have a cast here that has 3 tremendous veteran leads in Hawk and Mahershala Ali and Julia Roberts, and then you add in these 3 kids, all turn in really good performances, all very unique and very different, and all of those perspectives add so many layers to this movie. This thing I thought was brilliant, start to finish. Again, like, just one of those, this is a movie that just kind of sits with you, and the more it sits with you, it seems like the better it gets. I'm going 4 out of 5 C-Maniacs with Leave the World Behind. I've said everything I've got to say there. Now I'm flipping it over to you. Have you guys checked out Leave the World Behind on Netflix? How did it make you feel? Am I over the top? Am I over dramatic? Or were you feeling that fear too? How would you survive, react in a situation like the movie? Like I said, me, I'm donezo, man. Like, if satellites go out, game over, man. I'd be lost. I could get from here to home. I could probably get into the city and figure out a few things in those regards. But, like, I need GPS at all times, man. So, like, how would you fare in that type of situation? There is another actor in this movie that I kind of forgot to mention. Kevin Bacon does pop up in here. He's fantastic, and is a different perspective and a different look at people who maybe are a little bit more prepared for situations like this. Where would you land? Are you one of him? Are you a Mahershala Ali? Are you a Julia Roberts? Anything that you got, man. I want to know how this movie made you feel, how you think you'd survive this type of game over type scenario. What worked, what didn't? Were you scared? Did you have a good time? Was it uncomfortable? Anything you got, good, bad, indifferent, put it down below. Keep it spoiler free. But I look forward to talking to you down in the comment section. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with C-Man anytime. We're talking movies, TV, trailer reactions. We're working towards getting to the best of 2023. You want to be here for that. You want to see my thoughts in general on the movies that I liked this past year. You just dig the vibe. You want to see what other things the C-Band's getting into as we start off this year. You just want to show a little love and support, and you haven't yet. Come join C-Maniac Nation. It's where all those things happen, and you can do it simply by jumping over there, hitting that subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts. Until next time, for the C-Man's Cinema Sit Down. I've been the C-Man. I'm signing off. Peace.
Oh, you guys are still here. You snuck up on me. You must be looking for more of this guy. Well, I got 2 video options for you, man. Right up here and right over here. And if you want all those C-Man goodies, well, hey, come join the squad right on over there, and I'll catch you on the next one.